So good morning, friends. We are absolutely honored and delighted to have with us Vivek Virani and friends. Welcome to the Vedanta Society. When Vivek and I were collaborating together on this musical series, someone in our congregation said, "Why this?" And so for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with our tradition and Ramakrishna's life, he would be inspired by kirtan and also by singing. His famous kirtan and Panahati, if you haven't read his life, is a must-read. It's so inspiring. And his foremost disciple, Swami Vivekananda, was a musician, a songwriter, and a singer as well. And in fact, he wrote the first two songs of our arati when he was in Baba Samadhi, the Om Ring Ritang and the Kandana Bhava Pandara. And so there was one grammatical mistake, but he said, please change any grammatical mistakes, even though he was in that high mood. And so we have this in our tradition. My own guru, Swami Prabhavananda, who was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda, the first president of our order, used to tell us how Swami Brahmananda would be surrounded by musicians. And one day he was with a band of musicians, and one was just playing musical notes. And a bystander said, "Why? What's going on?" It was critical. And that jarred Maharaj. And he said to the man, "Don't you realize that sound is Brahman?" So I'd like to invite you to this first in a series of 4 on spirituality and music. And now, Vivek Virani.
to Shri Ramakrishna, the Divine Mother, to Mataji for inviting us, and to the company of saints gathered to share in a talk of devotional love today. Our topic today is Bhakti. And these verses from Narada describe Bhakti as something not really to be philosophized, but to be experienced. Vachaniyam Prema Swarupam Mukha Narada compares Bhakti not to a concept or an idea, but to a taste, a flavor, something that we feel in our bodies that words really can't capture. This is our first in a series of musical talks on music and spirituality. And we're beginning with Bhakti for a few reasons. One, because the theme of all the talks is going to be experience, and how different spiritual traditions experience the divine through music. Bhakti is special to begin with because, one, it's a concept that is really core to the way that spirituality emerges in our Vedanta tradition. In fact, Swami Vivekananda describes it as a unique spiritual path because it's a path in which the path and the goal are one. So the central sadhana or practice of Bhakti is loving God. And the goal of Bhakti is loving God. So it's not some practice where we meditate with a goal that will experience something that we're not in right now. Your practice is to love, and your goal is just to love more. That makes this practice of Bhakti something that's accessible in a way that many other paths can be difficult to attain without proper guidance, without the proper mindset and the proper setting. Before we go further, we should be on the same page. What is Bhakti? I'm sure many of you are familiar with this term. We use it to mean devotion. It can mean devotion, adoration, love, worship. This root, bhaj, in Sanskrit also has the connotation of sharing, which is very important because Bhakti, as we'll discuss, is a kind of love that is always expressed in exchange, in company, in community. There's always an other, even if that other is something we don't perceive to be outside ourselves. But that sharing must occur for the Bhakti love to be experienced. And during today's presentation, we'll highlight a few aspects of what makes Bhakti a kind of unique form of experience, specifically its relationality, its aesthetics, and its emotional characteristics. And I should note that the Narada Bhakti Sutras, which we opened with, describe Bhakti in great detail. These characteristics are not from the sutras, they're from my own experience as a scholar who has the very, very blessed and privileged job, where my job is to interact with devotees and spiritual seekers from different religious traditions, and just to understand what motivates their journeys to the divine, and then talk about it in universities. This is basically what I've got to do for my career. So these are qualities that have emerged when we think about Bhakti in relation to other traditions. Its relationality, its aesthetics, and its emotional characteristics. And I should note that we began today with Sanskrit verses. I'll admit in some way I felt in the space of the Vedanta Sangha, I almost needed to do that. But the tradition of Bhakti is really kept alive not through Sanskrit verse, not through philosophy. It's kept alive through song. And these songs are almost always not in Sanskrit, because this is a language that many people, in fact most of the people in South Asia don't have access to. It's kept alive in songs in vernacular languages, in the languages of the people. So we'll have songs in a number of different languages from different regions of South Asia today. And many of these songs are attributed to great figures we call sants or poet saints, figures who have remarked on the quality of bhakti in beautiful poetry in their own way. So we began with a poem by one of these sants, a sant from the Marathi tradition, the Varkari tradition. In Maharashtra, this tradition, we call it the pilgrimage tradition because the central act of worship for the Varkari devotees is to make a yearly pilgrimage to the holy city of Pandharpur, where the deity Vithala resides. And this is a magical kind of pilgrimage because the experience of walking miles and miles from different parts of Maharashtra to reach Pandharpur, it's a communal expression of love. And it's within this community of devotees that the real love, the real identity of the God really comes into being. So we have this beautiful, weeks-long pilgrimage where people are interacting from different parts of the state of Maharashtra and from different parts of India, and they're singing, they're playing, they're dancing. The saint Tukaram in the 17th century wrote beautiful poetry expressing love to Vithala, a form of Krishna. But the poem that we've chosen for today actually doesn't focus on the God, on Vithala. It focuses on the beauty of watching the devotees of God at play. And what we realize right away is that the highest realizations of Vedanta, the truth that divinity resides in each and every person, are experienced in this space of devotion. Tukaram watches as the devotees play and dance on the banks of the river, and he says, isn't it beautiful to watch each of them touching each other's feet, seeing that God, Vithala, in the other devotees. We began our song with the celebration of devotion and the community of devotees. such a beautiful image here of devotees of God touching each other's feet, experiencing this almost utopian community of love and sharing and joy. I hate to be the skeptic in the room, but as a scholar, it's what we're trained to do. The question that emerges right away is this real? Is this just a game that we play for like 3 days a year and then go back to being our regular selves? It's a really important question to ask. And you know, as scholars, we ask it a lot. How much do these ideas that we find in poetry, in spiritual texts, in songs, change the way that our world works? There's a complex answer to this question. And you know, we look at poems like this. They speak of varna abhimana, visarali, the idea of caste, the idea of family, clan, status, your position in society. All of that disappears. It doesn't matter. All of these devotees are playing together. So this is the refrain. This is what we sing. When we look at the society that celebrates this religion, is that actually the way the society is arranged? The unfortunate answer is no. These forces are still at play. In fact, I think it was just recently, about 10 years ago, that people from underprivileged castes were even allowed into the innermost sanctum of the very temple in which they sing this. And there's an extra irony here, because some of the great saints, like Tukaram is one of the saints of the Divakar tradition, some of the other saints, like Sokamela, like Soirabhai, are from castes that are stigmatized, are considered impure. And people from the tradition valorize them, even pray to them as saints. And then people from those castes, until recently, were still stigmatized. So what do we do with this information? I think one of the most common modes that we encounter in scholarship is to take an extremely skeptical position, to say, well, there's an easy answer. It's hypocrisy. People are hypocrites. You don't really have to think about it more than that. I think that's a valid position for people to take. I'm not going to argue. But in my experience with devotees, with devotional communities, through my research, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think there's no doubt in interacting with people, in many cases people who have inherited generations, centuries of prejudice and bias, that devotional love, that song, changes people's hearts. It changes the way that we react to each other. It fundamentally changes our ability to perceive the humanity in others. And the way that we behave in life cannot help but be infected by this recognition of mutual humanity. The conclusion I've increasingly been coming to in my research, to somewhat steal and repurpose a quote from Salman Rushdie, is that Bhakti does something very magical. Poetry and song do something very magical. They enable us to imagine a world that is actually more perfect than the world that we've been able to create ourselves. And more importantly than that, they help us to imagine ourselves as we might be if we were worthy of that world that we imagined. So it's not a simple act of saying, oh, that would be nice, but we're not going to. It's the space that we are able to create in Bhakti is a space that we really need this magic of song and poetry to create, because the world makes it difficult to imagine it in other terms. And this is something that we'll keep coming back to, the way that Bhakti enables things that can be difficult in other parts of life, in other parts of spirituality. One of the places we see this in its most stark form is the Bhakti treatment of human relationships. In many of our spiritual traditions, human relationships are treated as something of an unfortunate distraction. In fact, in some in some texts you'll get the idea, whether or not it's the author's intent, it's easy to read it and get the idea that if we didn't have these human relationships, we'd all be enlightened, but they just keep getting in the way. They keep sapping our emotional energy, and most importantly, they enforce the Maya, the false identification that we have with the material world. There's nothing that roots us to this material world more powerfully than the exchange of emotional energy we have with other people. This is a hard problem to solve. Vedanta, of course, has come up with really beautiful ways of taking us beyond this. Some of those can be difficult. Meditation, a monastic community. Monastic traditions almost create a space where human relations don't exist. Now, we know that's not really true because the monastic community and Sangha is itself a space of human relations. I'm really enjoying singing in this space, watching the Sangha of Swami Vivekananda and the brother monks, disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And of course, in the monastic space, you've got rid of the relationship of husband and wife, of mother and child, but the relationship of Guru and Shishya becomes just as powerful. And we can see this in the writings of Sri Ramakrishna's devotees, that all of them looked at Ramakrishna, really as their mother, as this figure of nurturing and of emotional adoration. Bhakti doesn't ask us to figure out a way around these relationships. Instead, it does something beautiful, something almost alchemical. It transmutes the emotional energy, which we're mired in, which we're sapping, which is overwhelming us every day. The emotional energy that we dedicate to other people, it transmutes that into love for God. And it does that in beautiful ways. So, right now, I'm at a stage in my life when the biggest emotional relationship I have is I have 2 young children. It's very easy to get completely mired in that emotional relationship. But it's also very easy, and parents will relate, to see divinity in that relationship. To understand the omnipresent divinity that resides in every molecule of creation. It's a fact that we all will arrive at because it is the nature of our very souls. But it's hard to realize in this moment. In this moment, it's super easy because look at those faces and see, there's a bright spark of divinity shining in that. Bhakti enables us to take that relationship and find the divine in it. So poets, like the great poet Surdas, have taken relationships like the relationship between Ma Yashoda and baby Krishna, and used these spaces, this mischievous, loving relationship between mother and child, as a space to understand divine play. I won't relate the whole story because I'm sure many are familiar with it, but the baby Krishna has stolen butter, and Mother Yashoda is chastising him. And Krishna is saying, Mother, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. And he knows that he did it. And she knows that he did it. And he knows that she knows that he did it. But this beautiful play, this innocent play between mother and child, culminating in Krishna saying, how can you not believe me? Do you not think of me as your own son? Do you think of me as if I'm someone else's son? A line that just breaks this foster mother's heart. So she can't do anything but embrace him. She can't do anything but be overwhelmed by love. So fittingly, as we go, I'll introduce the wonderful musicians and devotees who are on the stage here. Fittingly, this song will be performed by my wife, Dr. Turiya Nair, the one who brought those beautiful babies into the world. A song, very famous poem by Surdas, in which Krishna says, Mother, it wasn't me, I didn't steal that butter. We're so fortunate today to have so many wonderful devotees and musicians on stage with us. So I introduced my wife, Dr. Prajan Nair. She usually goes by Ria, but with Vedantins, I think Turiya is her actual name. And singing with us today, we have other people like us who have grown up in this country but saturated in bhakti as a mode of practice. People who have been singing bhajans their entire lives as their primary engagement with music and with God. So I'm so happy to have on my left Bharti Venkat and Nandu Niranjan, two really wonderful singers. And then you heard just now our incredible violin player Prajan Divakar. And all the way on the right, we owe a very, very deep gratitude to Rajesh Bhatt, who actually didn't know about this program until around 11 p.m. last night when we had a family emergency arise for another participant, and with an extremely open heart, Rajesh agreed to join us. So we're so blessed to have him here today. Facet number 2, bhakti, as I understand it, is fundamentally an aesthetic experience. I used to have a mentor in grad school who described religion itself as an art form. And he would draw attention to the devotion for the mother experienced by Catholics, especially by Mexican Catholics. And he argued that it's impossible to conceptualize what love for Mother Mary means in Mexican Catholicism without considering the experience of the artistic object that is the image of La Virgen de Guadalupe, the image of Mother Mary that appeared in a particular shrine, wearing this radiant talma, this radiant robe. And this really resonated with me because I think it's fundamentally true of bhakti as well, and perhaps no more so than Krishna bhakti. Because I really do think we can't say simply that there's a religion of Krishna bhakti that has inspired song and dance and poetry and painting and storytelling. I would say that the religion of Krishna bhakti is song and painting and dance and storytelling and literature. The religion is the art, and that our understanding in this Maya of what Krishna means is really not just expressed, but created, circulated, built, shared through these artworks. This is probably no more the case than in the beautiful relationship between Krishna and his most dear devotee, Radha. We can think of Radha as a stand-in for each one of us as devotees. We can think of Radha as a literary character. And this is very much the approach that is taken by the great poet Jayadeva, whose 13th century poem, the Gita Govinda, is really the literary work that most fleshes out Radha as a character. And in this, Radha and Krishna are it's treated as a stage play by someone who was a professional writer of romantic poetry and stage dramas. And it's treated as a romantic drama that is very self-consciously intended to awaken the hearts of devotees. Jayadeva, who's always deservingly, but always very confident in his own poetic abilities, says in some of the most beautiful Sanskrit, Shri Jayadeva Manitam Idam Adikam Yadi Manasa Nachayena Hari Viraha Kula Vallaya Yogvati Sati Vajanam Pataniyam. If your heart ever longs to dance, then listen to my poem, this masterful poem of mine. Again, he's confident that he deserves it. Of the play of Radha and Krishna, not just the play, but the experience of viraha, of separation between these two, because the whole play of the Gita Govinda is a play of two lovers separated. And it's completely an artificial separation, right? The cause of it is completely artificial, right? Krishna is playing in the forest. Radha sees him playing with all the other gopis and storms away. And then he's heartbroken because she's not there, and she's heartbroken because he's not there. It's a completely relatable emotional experience, and it's also a complete farce because they both know that they're both with each other constantly. And the language of the poetry does something that philosophical texts do, but that poetry does in a much more magical way. It expresses this play between duality and unity, between Dvaita and Advaita, between the human soul and the divine soul, not as a concept, not as a teaching, but as a dance. These two, this interplay between the two and the one is enacted by Radha and Krishna in the most beautiful fashion, in this kind of drama, dance, romantic coupling. So, Krishna is now away from Radha and just despairing because Radha is not with him. In I think the 7th Ashtapadi, the 7th song, he says, Chintayami tadhananam kutilabhu gopakarena shona padmam evo pari shona padmam evo pari ramatakulam pramarena hari hari hata dharataya dhata sa kupiteva. Again, I'll try not to geek out about the incredible Sanskrit wordplay here between Bhru and Parena and Brahmana and Brahmarena. A lot of different words that use similar roots. He's thinking about Radha's face with her brow crooked like Indra's bow, shooting the arrows of sidelong glances. This is something that I've certainly experienced from my wife. I don't know if it's relatable to anyone else. But the beauty here comes when he reveals the lie of this whole play. And he says, yeah, actually I know we're united in my heart. We're just pretending right now. But still, let's stay in this space of separation so we can experience the heart-rending feeling of separation and see what it does to our hearts. He gives the lie to it. He says, Tahameham pridisangata manisham brisham ramayami kim vane musanamitam kim krita vilapami. And there's a beautiful line here that I thought I had included, but I don't have in the text. In the next verse where he says, you're already in my heart, and yet I long for you. And then the next verse after this, he says, Dehi darshani sundaram. Dehi sundari darshanam. Oh, beautiful one, give me your darshan. So those of you who have grown up in pious Hindu households recognize the incredible inversion that is happening here, where God is telling a devotee, I long for your darshan. I long to see you. And this is the beautiful play that happens. It happens constantly. I could do a whole geek out session for an hour and a half just on the Gita Govinda, but maybe we'll save for another day. The romance between lovers becomes here an incredible poetic metaphor for the romance between the divine soul and the individual soul in so many different ways. In another, after they're reunited, in another verse, Radha says this, after hungrily, frustratedly biting her lover, she says, I bite your lower lip and I feel pain in my own body. How can anyone say that these two souls are not one? There are more examples which are even less PG-13 in this poem, but we'll save them for another day. And we'll experience the love and the magic of Krishna through chant, through song. I hope you'll all sing with us as we revel in the aesthetic experience of divinity. The flute-bearing Krishna and the beauty that this form represents. The God who is capable of intoxicating us and destroying that one thing that roots us in Maya and samsara more powerfully than anything else, the mind, the Mohana Krishna who captures this mind. Let us sing to that Krishna. please sing with us. Sorry if I didn't warn you all at the beginning that you all have to participate. But participation is really important in Bhakti. It's this communal expression of love that really awakens the flame of divinity in our hearts. And this is something that many traditions in India and around the world have experienced. One of the most celebrated in Northeast India, of course, is the tradition of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And initially, actually, I thought we might also include a Bengali kirtan or song in today's program. Then I realized I wasn't brave enough to sing in Bengali in front of so many Bengali speakers. So Bhakti, of course, makes us fearless. I'll let you come to your own judgments about my level of Bhakti based on that. But this practice of singing together is something that we do in countless traditions. In India, we have the tradition of Chaitanya, we have the tradition of Nanak, which we won't talk about today, it's the Sikh tradition, but for the third event in our series, we'll be getting a lot of Nanak, Kabir, and other Nirgun sons. and the tradition of Sampradaya Kirtan, which we'll have at the end of today's session from South India. But this transcends religion. I mean, we use the word bhakti in the Hindu space, but it transcends Hinduism. A lot of recent scientific literature, and I'm very excited to learn this. One of the top studies in the journal Nature, or actually in scientific reports in Nature in print last year, was scientists discovering that doing activities in beat together creates synchronization in thinking between a group. And this is something that scientists are finding ways to explore now, but our people, ethnomusicologists, have actually known for decades, because it's what we do. We go amid communities who do music together, and you can see the way it creates integration, it creates love. So in India, it's not just the Hindu community that does this. Next session in September, we'll be doing a lot of music from Sufi traditions and other traditions, but today we're going to share a song that we're all going to sing together, at least for part of it, from the Christian Bhakti tradition, the Yeshu Bhakti tradition. It's a bhajan, it's not a hymn, it's not a song, it's a bhajan to Christ. The first part of this, which we can sing, and you can enjoy and listen, is the words of Christ translated into Hindi. Of course, he didn't say them originally in English or in Hindi, but I do think they sound a little bit sweeter in Hindi than we're used to hearing them in the King James Version in English. And then the second part will be just a few simple lines singing the glory of Christ again in Hindi, and we'll sing and we hope you'll all sing along with us. The final quality about Bhakti that we'll discuss today is that fundamentally Bhakti is an emotional experience. Emotion is, of course, part of the human condition. And it's a part that is variously seen as a hindrance or distraction or obstacle in some of the traditions we'll discuss, like in the session on Nadi Yoga we'll have a few months from now. But in Bhakti, we don't try to overcome emotion. We lean into it, we let it be what it is. And we find ways to transmute that emotional relationship into a relationship with God. And this is something that the great Bhaktas have done almost intuitively by nature. There's maybe no greater example in our modern era than Sri Ramakrishna, who, as we know, was so overcome by love for Mata Durga that we can see the level of spiritual insight and realization that just flowed out of him, that seemed to be born from that experience of love. So we'll celebrate love with a song to the Mother Goddess. perhaps no greater example, and maybe no more popular example, of being overcome by the emotion of love for God than the saint Mirabai, the Rajasthani princess from the 15th century, who was just from the early stages of her life enraptured by the idea of Krishna. And what makes her so relatable is, unlike some of the devotees we mentioned, Yashoda, Radha, Mirabai had no personal contact with Krishna, but from childhood was just consumed by her love for Krishna. And there's something really important to note here. That we talk about the Bhakti saints, the poet saints, the sons. In some parts of worship and religion in many of the Bhakti traditions, these sons have almost become divine figures, or literally become divine figures. And at times, what this can turn into is replacing a pantheon of gods with a pantheon of saints. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's an even more powerful message there, which isn't to elevate these select devotees to the status of deity, but to recognize that devotion, that love that's in every human heart, and to sacralize, to sanctify that experience of love that's in all of us. I think what makes this really tangible is the fact that if we're honest, and at least as scholars we have to be honest sometimes, we don't actually know where any of this poetry comes from. We don't know who wrote any of it. We think some of it probably was written by the people whose names are on it. In the case of poets like Surdas or Tukaram, there's a historical record, so we know a lot of what they actually wrote. But poets like Meera, we don't know when, if ever, she wrote anything. Most of the poetry we have that has Mirabai's name in it is by hundreds, thousands of unnamed authors over the years in places like Rajasthan. Some people are disappointed by this because they're like, oh, it's inauthentic. No, I think this is way more powerful, because what this means is that whatever we call Mirabai, that relationship with God that we describe through Mirabai, is actually an understanding of supreme truth that exists in the minds and the hearts of the people, that is shared by the people in simple language, in the folk traditions, in songs, in poetry, in dance, and in art. It's not an elevated or scholarly tradition. It's a tradition that belongs to everyone. So, we'll be sharing one of my favorite songs of Mirabai from the Rajasthani tradition, in the Rajasthani language and style, that you'll all see right away arrives at one of the highest and most fundamental truths of Vedanta, Brahma Satya Jagat Nitya. Divinity is real and the world is false. A very difficult truth for us to wrap our minds around. But Mirabai gets there easily through her devotion to Krishna. In this, Mirabai says to her material husband, the person she's physically married to, that this world, this beautiful palace you've given me, this beautiful land, this colorful country, she calls it of yours, means nothing to me because there's nothing here. And she even says, using the metaphor of her wedding bangles. So in many places in North India, especially places like Rajasthan, brides, when they get married, those bridal bangles, the day that their husband dies, they shatter them. And it's really, if you think about it, a very powerful symbol that all the bonds we have to material attachments, to human relationships, are going to break one day. And Meera says, if that's going to happen, then why should I even bother with you? You prince, you're not going to be here tomorrow. Instead, I'm going to tether my heart, tether my soul to that man who is there forever, that divinity, that Krishna. So she says beautifully, Na bhave dharo. Desarudo, Brahmarudo. I don't care for your country.
तारो देश मेरा साथ नहीं है, तारो देश मेरा प्रीत नहीं है, लोग बसे सब
So thank you all so much for sharing this space with us. I hope you'll be able to attend the future events. I think our next one is in September. We'll be discussing the ways that different religions have found ways to experience divinity. Sufi, Christian, Jewish, and other faiths, and talk about how this shared experience that takes so many forms points us to one reality as we learn from Divakar. So thank you so much, all of you, for being with us, for listening and for singing. Thank you to the board of the society for holding space for this event, and to Mataji for inviting us all, and to these wonderful musicians for making this a beautiful program.